Hello, everybody. I am Lara Muzio, the host of the Food Freedom Summit. And today we're here with Dave Wolf. Thank you, Dave, for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you
And
for having me.
thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? We've already talked with your mom and your partner in business. So, and you three are the people at Sugar X Global. So can you tell a little bit about your personal story and how you came up with the entire idea of creating Sugar X?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I would come home from school every day, like, I don't know, kindergarten, first grade. And I live in a relatively cold climate, at least in the winter. So I'd have like gloves, hat, scarf, all these things on. I'd run downstairs. I'd go into the pantry. I'd grab like five. If you had these boxes of fruit snacks, there were like 6 little packs in the box. So I'd grab 5 of them. I don't want to grab them all. I'd leave one. I'd eat them all. And then I'd like hide the wrappers under sofa cushions and behind cabinets and things like that. And so I didn't really think, anything of it for a long time. So I had this like kind of like sneaking behavior with food. Turns out later, I was talking to my mom about this like throughout my recovery process, and she just thought the babysitter was stealing food because I was always a thin, lean kid. So weight definitely isn't really a big part of my story, but definitely like the compulsion to eat was always there. And at a very young age, I was put on ADHD medication. I think my sister was diagnosed with ADD. She must have been in like the 3rd grade or so. I must have been like first grade. So and so I was put on Ritalin at a very young age. So I think what happened was it covered up most of my behaviors in that it suppressed my appetite so much. So I would like kind of eat breakfast and then I wouldn't eat lunch or anything in between until dinner. And then at dinner, I would like eat for like 3 adults. Like it was like making up all this lost ground. And I think my mom did the best she could with the knowledge that she had at the time in terms of like how to feed kids and things. Like there was always a vegetable. When I say that, I mean some of the vegetables that she served us probably wouldn't consider vegetables today, like potatoes and corn and things like that. So there's always a vegetable. There was always a salad. There was always a main. And there was a lot of emphasis on family meal, eating together. So I think all that went really well. I just think we were basing it on the nutritional information that was provided to us at the time, which was largely highly fallible. So I think that's kind of, and then I just was drawn to food, like eating it, cooking it, preparing it, talking about it, what's for dinner, and I ended up pursuing a career ultimately in culinary arts and then a career in nutrition. And I wanted to do that because I loved food, but I also wanted to help people. So I thought I was like in this idyllic kind of fantasy, like, well, if I become a dietitian, I'll be able to help people with food. And then I went through the criteria for becoming a registered dietitian and started to realize that I guess in hindsight, a lot of the advice that I was providing was wrong, that it was harmful. And so then I as I'm doing this, I'm also like working in this dynamic, which is like wrong, basically. Like, we're doing things because they've been passed down to us, not because they're right. So I think that's one of the problems with the medical school system is like doctors aren't telling their students the wrong things. They're just telling them the things that they're familiar with that just happen to be wrong. So, or old. And so I think these things get passed down. And so so I ended up in the critical care. I was doing nutrition therapy for people that couldn't even breathe for themselves. And then I ended up leaving and I ended up working in bariatrics. And so this was sort of my first exposure to addicts outside of my family, although the addicts didn't know that they were addicts. We ended up teaming up with a guy in what was called CCAP, which is drug and alcohol treatment floor in the hospital. And we sort of viewed bariatric surgery like it was an inpatient stay for detox. And so we started equipping people with information about relapse prevention techniques that they would use for alcohol, drugs, and other behavioral addictions. And we started to notice that the people that were applying these practices into their life were doing really well, really irregardless of anything else. Socioeconomic status, which surgery they had, affluency, gender, didn't matter. When they started to approach it from a preventing of a relapse, then they started to have much more longstanding results and they were able to stay more level. Whereas the reality that we see, or what I saw, and this isn't, I can't prove this in any way other than my experience, is that people would lose weight for about 6 months, they'd stall for about 6 months, and then they'd start to gain weight again. Those people were addicts, right? So the surgery helped them for the first 6 months, but after that, it didn't really do anything. And I think that we really need to look at it like, I mean, I'm very direct. I mean, I work with addicts. We have to be direct. So I say, like, the surgery it's not a lobotomy. Like, you're not like taking away your brain. We're just trying to make your stomach smaller. So you still have the same brain, you just have a smaller stomach. So what do you do if you're a food addict and you still have the same thinking and the same brain and the same behaviors and the same diet mentality and all that? But you can't physically use the way you used to use. So then I think we see a lot of some people call them cross addictions. I don't really believe in cross addictions. I just believe in addiction. Kind of look at it like people are just changing seats on the Titanic. They're just different outlets. So they still are manifesting their addiction, but in different ways, like with alcohol or with shopping or sex or relationships. So I think that's what ends up happening. And I think that's what happens in the addiction world too. And just because you put the drugs and the alcohol down, oftentimes people think they switch over to food, but in reality, they probably started out with food, then switched over to alcohol, then switched back to food. So, because when we do critical assessments on people, we see they meet diagnostic criteria, I mean, by the age of 10 or younger. And usually first symptom is anywhere between 3 and 6. So usually 5. So it starts so young, and it starts with the food, right? I mean, some kids are formula fed, right? So they have sugar by what, second week of life. So it's pretty scary. So yeah. So anyway, I end up working in this bariatric clinic, and then I lost my job for a period of time. And that's when I ended up in recovery. So I was helping addicts before I was even aware that I was an addict myself. So I enrolled in this program called InFact, which is run by this woman named Esther Helga Gudmundsdottir. She's from Iceland. And she did an intake for me to become trained as an international food addiction counselor. And she said, based on my assessment, you're likely an early stage food addict. And I had no defense. So I said, you're probably right. My mom's a food addict. My sister's a food addict. My mom comes from a long line of people that we likely meet criteria for food addiction. I mean, they don't say it, but I mean, just, you can watch them and you can see it. But anyway, so like I tell people, like, if you shake my family tree, a bunch of addicts just fall out. It's just the reality. So I think that's the scenario I was in. So I'm like, Esther Helga tells me I'm probably an addict. Yeah, okay, stealing fruit snacks, it was like, I ate like brown foods, like growing up. It was like crackers, bread, toast, apple juice, So it was like, oh, okay, I started to put pieces together and I started to look at it, still not willing to really address it fully. But then the job loss gave me time. And so I said, I really wanted to evaluate my life. And I had some tendencies with alcohol and some other substances, but it wasn't like my relationship with food. So I got involved with people that were recovering from drug addiction and alcoholism, and I saw a lot of parallels. And I just kind of did what they told me to do, and I transformed my life. And now I'm at this place now where in between, so I'm in recovery. Then my first job in recovery was I was in a nursing home as a dietitian, literally pushing sugar and supplements to people. Like, that was what my job was. So I had this big conflict. It was like a subconscious battle zone. It was just really hard to know what I knew in my experience personally, and then having to do the complete opposite during the day, but like helping sugar addicts by night, my private practice. So I think it was just exhausting, and I didn't realize how exhausting it was until I stop doing that. And so then basically we bought a handle. We just like, all right, SugarX Global. We just bought it. We didn't know what we were doing. And that was the start. And then we just started putting pieces together. And then it took us a while to figure out kind of a model that worked. And we run this 5-day challenge. We have one coming up on July 18th. So Crush Your Cravings Challenge. And I think that we just realized that people don't have, like, we didn't have what we have now when we started to try to solve this problem. Like, we didn't have the resources. We didn't have the understanding. We didn't have a community. We were all alone. And we really made very, very slow, painful progress. And so we find when you just like put these things on a silver platter and be like, here is your toolbox. Here's what you need in order to be successful. And the people that are ready to do the work, they do it and they have incredible success. And there are people that aren't ready to do the work yet, whether it's they need to, what we call in the addiction world, more research and development, which is like, well, let's go back to that old way of life and see what happens. Even though it hasn't worked 1,000 times before. And sometimes they need that. They need that experience to really know, like capital K know, on a gut level, that like, this is who I am and this is the problem that I'm dealing with. So I think, but the people that are ready, and some of them are off of multiple diabetic medications or down pant sizes, but really the main thing they do is they get their brain back. So I think they're not dealing with brain fog when they wake up every day. They can, like, we have a woman who had a traumatic brain injury and she thought that her brain was doomed, but it wasn't. It was the sugar. So I think you start to see people change fundamentally by just applying these pieces of the puzzle in and day out. And so that's kind of who I am. That's kind of where I come from. And that's kind of what keeps me moving forward and helping these people who don't have, the people that I help know more about dieting than I do. And I'm a clinically trained registered dietitian. That's just the truth. So that's not the food. The food isn't the problem. Do you need to solve the food to get to everything else? Sure. Yes, you do. You got to put your drugs down, but the food isn't the thing that we need to treat. We need to treat everything else, but we need to get your brain free, and that happens by putting the drugs down.
Yes, thank you. That has been like so interesting, and like there are so many good points that you made. Like, you get your brain back. That is so good, and like food is just one thing, but the work is more complex. So can you tell us a little bit about how you guys at SugarX approach the work, and how can someone know if they actually have an addiction to food, or if it's just like maybe yo-yo dieting, or is there a way to understand it, like by yourself, if you're ready? Because a lot of people don't really want to know, but if someone in the
Right.
audience wanted to know, how can they actually go about it?
So there's a tool called Sugar, which it stands for, oh God, I can't remember what it stands for, but basically it's a objective interview-based assessment. What it does is it takes people through the criteria for substance abuse disorder, through the DSM, which is the American standard, and through the ICD-10, which is the international standard. And it basically, there's 24 potential symptoms of what we call, what is the word? Pathological use, which is addiction. So, and then what it does is it also rules out harmful use, when harmful use is sort of on the emotional, behavioral, but non-addictive spectrum. So it's different. You could kind of call it like eating disorder spectrum.
Okay.
So, and
So
then
there is a difference there
yeah,
between.
and the important thing to know is that the treatment is completely different. And they're actually starting to do studies now where they're seeing that abstinence is a reasonable treatment, that people get a lot of gains and growth in eating disorders with an addiction-based treatment model. The other thing you need to understand, right, is that like a food addict might use binging, anorexia, and bulimia as coping mechanisms to manage the addiction, while they don't realize that they actually have an addiction. So they think that they're anorectic, but really they're just correcting for the addiction that they don't realize that they have. So you see a spectrum, especially like in teens and where, you know, they start to become weight conscious, and whereas they start to understand, wow, I'm bigger than a lot of other people. And then they start to like do these drastic measures, but they're outlets. So the problem is that binging, restricting, dieting, those can be addiction outlets. They can be other ways that people exercise, you know, their right to use, so to speak. So I think the sugar is really the gold standard for us, and that's Bitten Johnson's tool. I know I connected you with her, and she's fantastic. I highly encourage you listen to her. She is a force, and so the sugar is one thing. I think the other thing is, I mean, some people are okay with just asking them a simple question like, "Can you stop?" And usually it's like, "Well, yeah. Well, can you stay stopped?" And the only way to stay stopped is really to never use again. So you may have considered yourself stayed stopped, but here we are, you know. So I think that's the other criteria that I use, and I think it's overly simple. But I think sometimes that's what we need. We need overly simple. And then there's another tool called the Uncope. The Uncope was designed for, I believe, marijuana and alcohol, and we just adapted it for sugar. And C6 questions, or yes or no questions. You can do the screen in 30 seconds. And it just basically, if you have two or more yeses, you should probably do a sugar. Like, so it just tells us that most of the people that come in and find us, you know, they're 5 to 6 out of 6. So they're, you know, it's a screening tool. It's not a diagnostic tool. It's basically to tell us who needs to do sugar, to do more, to do some more deeper diving, to look into their past and seeing what their patterns are like. But I think, you know, generally speaking, you know, if you have 2 or 3 or more, then it's very likely that you have pathological use.
I see. Now I'm curious to actually go and try what my
So
results
it's
will be.
interesting though, because like if you actually look at the criteria for substance abuse disorder for food, first of all, it's not in the DSM. The DSM doesn't have food addiction as a diagnosis. So again, we're using the drug and alcohol criteria, but we've adapted it for food. But if you were to read through that criteria, like just as a layperson, you might actually meet criteria. I think the level of the population that would meet criteria for addiction is quite high. But the clients that we work with they're not the people with 5 or 6 symptoms. I mean, they're the people with 17 to 24 symptoms. So it's much more progressed. I think it does fly under the radar based on cultural norms too. I mean, like look at as a male, right? Look at like the dad bod. I was talking to someone and he was like, my kids called me fat, like he's got little kids. And it's like, you know, I just don't find that stuff funny. Like, and he said, well, I'm embracing the dad bod. And I just think that's so counterproductive and harmful. But it's become normal for dads to have that, to just, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
and
harmful.
it is. And I don't remember who told me, but in Turkey, if a middle-aged man doesn't have like what we would call the beer belly, then he's not considered a real man.
Mm. Yeah, I
We,
mean, their cultural norms have become crazy.
yeah,
Yeah,
and so
it's so harmful.
it is. So how can we actually go through all these social norms and all this advertisement that we have on food and what is cool, what is accepted, and just realize if something makes sense or if something is actually harmful, because a lot of things have been normalized, especially in recent years. And I feel like a lot of that is coming from how the food mandates and how our food is actually being produced, to kind of like make us buy more, make us eat more,
Right.
and accept that that is normal and that is what we should be doing.
So what do we do?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think you're right. And I always like call it food because it's really not food. Like food is a substance that's designed for human consumption. It usually has one ingredient, you know, um, like meat or broccoli, you know, whereas these foods aren't. These foods have 30, 40, or 50 ingredients. You know, you need a magnifying glass to be able to get through the information that's on there, and probably a dictionary to pronounce half the things that are in there, and make sure it's a recent dictionary because these are recent inventions. You know, these weren't ingredients that have been around a while. So I think one of the things I do is I have this thing called the trigger-free food triangle, and it's a tool that we've really expanded a lot, and it came from when I was working in the bariatric program. And so it's triangle is the 3 points are guilt, debate, and romance. Okay, so if there's something that you debate about, should I or shouldn't I, should I or shouldn't I? The answer is always no, you shouldn't eat it, right? It's literally causing you psychological stress to decide whether you should or shouldn't do something, right? So I think that's a sign, and you probably shouldn't do it, right? So that's debate. Guilt is the sort of the downfall after we've consumed it. So usually a food that you debate over, you will have guilt over, generally speaking. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, shoot. Why did I go back to the store? You know, right? We all know what that's like. We've all done it. And then the romance. And the romance really can help us distinguish the addicts from the non-addicts, because I think that it's a lust. It's like the secret lover that we're meeting, you know, alone, like rendezvous with the food. You know, it's like the emotions behind seeking, and like you'll see that people will. I had a lady who would like eat ice cream, but she would have like multiple gallons of ice cream so that her husband wouldn't find out. So she'd like eat half a carton and then like refill from another carton, and she'd bury the refill cartons on the bottom of the freezer and dig them out. Like, so it's like it ends up becoming these like insane behaviors. But not everyone has them. I mean, in some cultures or families, it's totally normal to just eat this way, right? But the other, I think guilt, debate, and romance, I think that's really helpful. So think about like hiding wrappers, or like putting things in the garbage beneath things, or like disposing of garbage outside of the home. So people don't, like people go through it faster at McDonald's, but then they like dispose of the waste in like a public trash as opposed to their trash at home. Kind of behaviors like that. I think that's the romance piece. So if a food triggers any of those 3 points, we call it a trigger food. It will trigger you. It's not a matter of when, it just will. So we can use that to isolate. So when we're going down the grocery store and we're looking at these foods, we can say like, well, am I having any debate about this particular thing? And note that these are yes or no questions. There's no like trigger scale. There's no like, well, how far is it on the gradient, to the right or to the left? No, they're absolutes. You know, will it trigger if there's debate? Yes. Will it trigger if you feel guilt? Yes. Will it trigger if there's romance? Yes. So I think that's one of the things we have we believe that the brain can't heal if the drug remains present. So that's kind of the other piece. And now what do we do about food is I think we need to see it like it's not food. Like it's like kibble for a dog. It's like this very processed thing that's very harmful and not designed for human consumption. Like you can learn about things like the bliss point, which is from basically they've done testing in a lab and they figure out like exactly how sweet, how thick, how salty something needs to be to elicit the maximum human response. the dopaminergic response. It's the same response that's elicited by cocaine and methamphetamines. I mean, it's hard. It's a hardwired neurotransmitter, but it's pleasure and saliency. And so I think we need to understand that food is designed, like the food that you consume that's processed isn't designed, first of all, to get you full. It's designed to give you an experience. And they use biochemical warfare through food-like substances to get you to have a reaction. So I think is very harmful. So, I mean, people have tricks like stay to the outside of the grocery store, but still, I mean, you go into, like, in the States, we have a store called Trader Joe's, and like, they put chocolate above the broccoli. Like they're just mean, you know? So they make it so that no matter how well you try to eat, it's in front of you. It's at eye level, or they put the kids' cereals at the kids' eye level, or, you know, whatever they need. And they put cute little characters on it with bright pictures and colors, and they put toys inside. And, you know, it's just, they're just hijacking kids' brains. So I think that's how we deal with it, because the food dynamic isn't going to change unless we as a population change. That will change the food dynamic. Us lobbying to change the food dynamic, the money is too tied. It's just not going to happen. So I think it's just like, how are we going to get the doctors to change? In order to get the doctors to change, I think the patients have to change. So I think it really has to be at the grassroots.
Yeah. And like the chemical warfare. That was
Right. Yeah. And you'll hear Bitten she calls it a chemical shitstorm. And I think that's what it is. It's just, I mean, like I said, it's designed to change. Like Eric Clapton does this video, and he's talking to 60 Minutes, and he's being interviewed about his addiction. And he's like, and the guy interviews, he was like, well, it started with heroin. And he's like, no, it started with sugar. It started with sugar on bread and butter and cookies and toast and this and that. He said verbatim, he said, I would do anything to change the way I think or feel.
wow.
So that's my definition of a drug. My definition of a drug is anything that changes the way you think or feel, which could be an iced coffee. I mean, it could be crack cocaine. And so I think we need to look at food that way. Does it change the way I feel? Does it change the way I think? Then it's probably not meant for me.
Yeah. That's very good.
It's harsh.
It is, but it's so needed to just like this wake up call. So if someone in the audience with this last sentence has felt like, oh, oh, I felt like that. I felt like when I ate something, when I drank something, then I felt different. Let's see how many times you feel the need to actually go there and eat that specific stuff, or drink that whatever coffee product they sell in very famous coffee shops that I'm not really a fan of.
Right.
But yeah. And wow. And so what actually happens to the brain when we start like taking out the drugs, whatever they are, food, this or that?
Yeah, I mean, so brain goes through a very long process of healing, but in the immediate, it goes through withdrawal. So just like withdrawing from hard drugs or alcohol, you're going to feel it, you know. You're going to be crotchety, you're going to be tired, you're going to have headaches. I mean, not everyone has all these symptoms, but I just kind of give you a milieu of them. Muscle cramps, tensions, abdominal distress, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, changes in respiratory rate, changes in breathing, extreme levels of anxiety. So any of these things or more, I mean, really, it could be occurring, and they don't necessarily last through the whole process, but they kind of come, oh, here's this one now, and then here's another one. I think most people get through most physical withdrawal symptoms in 3 to 4 weeks. Definitely by the end of the 10th day, you're definitely feeling, differently. I mean, even by the 5th day, you're noticing differences. And so in the brain, so I kind of look at it like, as you become an addict, you gain more and more and more receptors for the substance that you're after, which is usually dopamine. So you have more and more dopamine receptors. So what happens is they're kind of like these like hungry baby birds. Like they're squawking for a hit. They're squawking for a hit. And so the more and more that you have, the more loud the noise is to give you a hit, right? So then as those birds get really, really, really hungry over time, they start using, the body views it like a death threat. Like it views it like, if you don't give me this, my survival is being threatened. Right. I know I know you talked to Anna about a lot of primal stuff. So this is like really primal. Like I think one of the only brain systems that older than this, I learned this from Jordan Peterson, was our serotonin system, which is sort of our community needing system, which I think is really interesting because I think community and connection is a really important part of recovery. It's like, I know Judy talked about care, right? And the C is connection. Like we need to start connecting with other people that are going through what we're going through and understand, because Earth people, I call them Earth people, they don't get it like addicts do. So I think, okay, so these hungry birds squawking, squawking, squawking. And so they view that if they don't get a hit, it's death. They're going to die. We're going to die. The host is done. So they use all sorts of things. So we have something called red dog, blue dog. I don't know if they talked to you about that, but essentially like the red dog is the disease and the blue dog is sort of your recovery. You can also look at it like the red dog is your primal brain, your limbic system, and your blue dog is your prefrontal cortex, your large, amazing human brain, which has essentially been shut down by the addiction, right? So basically, the red dog is going to come at you and it's going to pivot, it's going to morph, it's going to shift, it's going to do whatever it can do to get to you to give it what it wants. So, and it's going to sit in the corner under the table really patiently, just waiting for scraps to fall. Like it's very patient. So we have something we call post-event collapse syndrome. So like, it's really funny. Like people will go on a vacation. They'll be like determined to get through their vacation clean. They'll get through their vacation clean. They'll come home and they'll binge. It's because they're not prepared for it. They've spent so much energy and so much effort on the event itself that they forgot to sustain their baseline recovery, right? So I think it's so important that we teach people about these things, because it's a normal human behavior to focus on the real urgency and to kind of let the other stuff go. But it's really, that's what happens is they get home and they lose it. Because they didn't Judy's 3 Ps, right? I don't know what you talked about, but the prepare, plan, prepare, and protect, right? They didn't protect their recovery. So then, right, it didn't last. So I think, and I think that all connects back to the brain. It's the red dog never dies. It's always there. I mean, my red dog is a lot quieter than it was 5 years ago. But if I have a bad day, it's going to come out to play. It's just I had a rough day the other day, and it was like red dog, red dog, red dog, red dog. And it's like one of my colleagues would be like, "Yeah, that's your red dog." Yeah, it is. And so we call each other out, and we find it really helpful. And people in the community help people. And we have a place in our platform that's called Tell on Red. And so you get to like let people know what Red is telling you, and it's amazing the kind of support that they get. So I think that's the brain. And then it just briefly, just to understand the brain for just the layperson, from the addiction perspective, there's 3 parts of the brain. There's the brainstem, which is responsible essentially to keep you alive. Like that's it. Just it keeps you breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature. That's it. Like if that part of your area is damaged, you're on life support. Limbic system, next level up. It's sort of like you've ever had a dog, that's its highest level of functioning. It's like, what do I need to do to get a cookie? That's how you train a dog. It's very reward based, right? And it's very emotional based. And then we have this superhuman brain called the prefrontal cortex, and that's the blue dog. And that's like, it helps us manipulate environments, create tools, build shelter, solve problems. But the problem is that the disease is in the limbic system. So it subverts. So we have to retrain the brain so it enables us to use the higher functioning brain, which has been shut down largely by decades of food drug use. So I think it's helpful for people to understand that, because I think it helps people get rid of shame. Shame is like, there's something wrong with me. No, you just have a brain that's been affected and you have to treat it. And then if you treat it and you continue to treat it, it will heal.
Yeah. Then I love that. It's just, we all have a brain. So if
Right.
if it's not functioning in a way that is supportive to you, and like having the real 100% human experience, then go in and do something about it instead of going shaming yourself.
Right.
What Judy and Anna mentioned, it's not a moral question.
Right. And it's not like, I mean, in all honesty, addicts were likely the people that survived evolution, right? Because we're like the doers of the world. We are like the think tanks of creating new things, and it's like, it's kind of like, come on, Ralph, let's go get an antelope. It's kind of like we're out of food. Let's go. Let's do something about it. Let's solve the problem right now. We're action takers. So I think we're likely the people that have survived. And I think when the addiction is harnessed, I mean, I don't think there's anything that can stop an addict in recovery. They're unstoppable. They're forces of nature. So I think they have really magical brains. It's just they have to overcome this one thing to be able to really fully tap into it. So we try to put a positive spin on it, because I think, I mean, it can be dreadful to be an addict. It might seem dreadful, but in recovery, it's a wonderful life.
Yeah. And I absolutely love the fact that it's not how can I say, it's not easy to do, but it's doable, and you have to enjoy the process, in the
Right.
sense that, of course, there are going to be things, and we all know it, that are going to be difficult, emotionally, physically, and mentally. It's going to be a lot of stuff to kind of like put together like a puzzle. But if you have someone that is guiding you, and if you are enjoying every step of the process, in the fact that, if, like Dave just told you, you might have cramps and headaches and this and that, and when they come, because you are in the process of detoxing, you should be happy that you're having those symptoms. That means that you're on the right track. So instead of
Right.
saying, oh, this is not working, no, that's exactly the opposite. If you can
It is
reframe.
working. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you only have to go through this process once. I think people forget that, you only have to climb this stairwell once. And then after that, it's voluntary, like Judy says, like I have choice in the first bite, but after that, I lose my power of choice, right? If I eat a drug food after that first bite, I don't have choice anymore, right? So she says I have control over the first bite. That's what she says. But any other bite after that, I don't have control of. So I think that's important, and we need to remember these things when we're going through this process. That, well, really, emotions are the manifestation of a biochemical reaction. So it's and I think a lot of people say, like, I'm an emotional eater. It's like, okay, but where do your emotions come from? Right? So your brain has a recipe for sadness. It has a recipe for anger. It has a recipe. It's all chemical. So, it's like emotion, thought, feeling. So I think a lot of people think that it's, well, I think they just think it's feeling. But really, once we start to change our brain, we can really start to change our experience by changing our feelings and our thoughts, because the biochemistry is different. So in recovery, do I still get sad? Yeah, sure I do. But it's usually more about my thinking than it is about the emotions, which I can't control anyway. If your brain produces the biochemistry for sadness, guess what? It's coming, you know, and it's what you do about it. It's how you redirect your thinking. And I think that's the piece with the community. That's the piece with the coaching. That's the piece with the knowledge. That's the piece with the insight. Because you don't just have to like sit there and take it. You can do something about it. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they can do things to make their life better. Like they're just like, well, I'm destined to live out my days like this. I have people message me. We run a public group on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern every week. We've done it for 3 years. Since COVID started, I started it right when COVID broke out. And I'll have people message me right now, like I'm eating milk and cookies right now, and I'm like in the chat, privately, you're here. I mean, irregardless of what you're eating right now, you're here for recovery. And who am I to decide who's going to make it and who's going to not? I think I have people who I was like, they're never going to make it. And they make it. And then I have people that I think like, yeah, they're ready and they need years. So just kind of, and I've had people tell me that like, well, you're putting people in a system that they may not be ready for. They may not be ready for it, but who am I to decide what you're ready for? That's silly, So I think we have to give people the opportunity to grow, recover, and transform. We have to give them the option. We have to give them the tools. And if they want to apply them, fantastic. If they don't, that's okay, but they'll always know about them. Like, so it's just like when the alcoholic comes into recovery and maybe they don't stop drinking, but their drinking is ruined. I mean, they don't enjoy drinking anymore. So I think that's important too, that people see the truth.
Yeah. And I think like people are there's this idea that, oh, I have to be strong, and that means never asking for help, never asking for support.
Oh yeah.
That's not true. I mean, one of the things that I've recently learned, because I've been through a leadership program, is like in a group of 100 and something people. And one of the things that everybody struggled with was asking for support. And that's insane, because if someone needed your help, you would gladly give them your help.
Right.
Why
Right.
can't you ask for it? Why can't you ask that? Like, there's no balance if you don't ask for support when you need it.
Sure. Like, have you seen the Elton John interview with Oprah? This is old. It's really old. About his alcoholism. This is like when he just, I think it was probably, he was probably interviewed about 10 years after he got sober. I think he's 30 or 35 years sober now. He's been sober a long time. But he said, the one thing that I wasn't ready to do was to ask for help. And he says, word for word, he says, swallow your pride will kill you. And I think in the diction, it will. So ask for help. And there's a guy named Mickey, and he says ask. The word ask stands for Ask Saving Kit, which I really like. And I think we need to learn how to ask for help. And we do this thing sometimes in our community with like, where you would ask, what's my superpower? And you'd be in a small group and people would tell you what they think your superpower is. Because I think we have no concept of really the superpowers that we have, but other people do. And I think that's the power of the connection. But the piece is that someone says to me, what's your superpower? She's like, well, do you always ask for help? I don't think of that as a personal superpower. I mean, I think of myself as actually quite stubborn, but I do. When I need help, I ask for it. And guess what? I get it. So I think it's really important and really powerful. And then the other big piece I would, tell people is, what is it serving you? Is whatever you're doing serving you? Because if it's not serving you, what are you doing? And because I think even me, I do things that don't serve me. What am I doing that for? Right. We all do it. And so I think that's really interesting about the leadership, but I do think people have a really hard time getting support. And I look at it like When I ask you for help, I give you the gift of you being able to help me or to serve me, and that will only fill up your cup. So it's very mutual.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
it is. It is, and it's not being selfish. You're not putting your needs in front of the other person. You're just taking care of yourself so
No,
that,
it's selfless.
yeah, so that you can help somebody else. I mean, once you learn something, or once someone has impacted your life and helped you in something, then when you see yourself, like a younger self, in another person, it's like, oh, look, I can help that person. I can give back. But you can't give back if you don't ask for
I mean, you
for
can't pour
something.
from an empty cup, you know?
Yes.
I mean, you can, but nothing's coming out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do that. A lot of people do. You know, there's a term, codependency. You know, I think is a terrible term because no one knows what it means. So the term we use is a compulsive helper, right? And I think people know what it means to compulsively help.
Yes. I've been
Listen to
there.
this. If you try to help someone that doesn't want your help, you're actually causing harm. Right? We have a tendency to give and give and give and give. And it's not perceived as helpful. It's perceived as harmful. So I think that we need to look at that. And I think, you know, there's an old saying like recovery is it's a selfish program, but it's not. It's a selfless program. It's about putting yourself first so that you can be of service to others. It's not selfish at all. It would be selfish not to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So if someone in the audience is ready to get some help and start to go about, maybe figure out like what your cravings are and everything, Dave and the SugarX Global community all together have a free gift for you guys. It's going to be here in this page, and it's the Crush Your Cravings checklist. So you can check if you have some of those cravings and how to start working with them. And they have also provided a gift for the VIP. So the Food Freedom Summit is, of course, 100% free event for you to attend, but consider upgrading to VIP if you want, first of all, to get all the wonderful, fantastic gifts that some of our speakers have provided. And also, you will have the interview for life. And on top of that, you're going to help the Noakes Foundation, because 50% of the earnings from the VIP package are going to be donated to the Noakes Foundation. So the Noakes Foundation is a South African nonprofit organization that is working towards changing the food mandates in South Africa and get South Africa to eat better. But they also have the Nutrition Network, which is available worldwide, and they educate people on real nutrition and what is going on, actually, what has gone wrong with our food. So consider upgrading to VIP. And if you do, you will get the 5-day Crush Your Cravings Masterclass from SugarX. So Dave, thank you so much. I will stay another like hour to
Oh, my pleasure.
nerd
Thank you.
out.
Yeah. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your amazing knowledge. And guys, get support. If you need it, ask for it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask for help.
Thank you so much.